Hey there, thanks for joining me. In 1954, one book changed the comic book industry forever, and it wasn't even a comic book. Dr. Fredric Wertham's Seduction of the Innocent caused a moral panic, which impacted comic books for decades to come. It also led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority, a self-regulatory body which stifled creativity and, for lack of a better word, censored the content that could be published. Today, we're exploring what might have been if the Comics Code Authority never existed, and how this legacy of censorship still echoes through the industry today. I'm Mark, and this is Comic Book Revival. Prior to 1954, comic books were experiencing their first true golden age. While Superman and Batman were gaining popularity, other genres were thriving too. Horror comics like EC's Tales from the Crypt were pushing creative boundaries. Crime comics were exploring complex moral territories. And romance comics attracted female readers in unprecedented numbers. At the forefront of the comic boom was EC Comics publisher William Gaines. His comics didn't just tell stories, they challenged societal norms. Tales from the Crypt wasn't just about horror. It was social commentary wrapped up in monster makeup. And titles like Shock Suspense Stories tackled racism, social injustice, and corruption at a time when most media wouldn't dare touch it. But this creative renaissance was about to come to an abrupt end. Enter the renowned psychiatrist Dr. Fredric Wertham. His book, Seduction of the Innocent, wasn't just criticism. It was a nuclear bomb aimed directly at the comic book industry. Wertham's argument? Comic books were causing juvenile delinquency and corrupting America's youth. Oh, and his evidence? Cherry-picked, sensationalized, and about as scientifically sound as the flat earth theory. But here's the kicker. People listened to him. People believed him. Despite his questionable research methods, Wertham's argument was so convincing it led to Senate hearings and even public comic book burnings. The industry's response to all this was self-censorship. The industry agreed to police its own content through the newly formed Comics Code Authority. Publishers would follow strict guidelines and submit their comics for approval. And these guidelines went way beyond just violence and horror. Even showing disrespect to authority or sympathizing with a criminal was banned. But what if the industry had stood its ground? I think comic book history might have played out a lot differently. Let's look at some what-ifs. Without code restrictions to hold them back, EC Comics would have easily thrived going into the next couple of decades. Imagine Tales from the Crypt evolving into the 1960s and the 1970s. They're publishing razor-sharp commentary on things like the civil rights movement and the horrors of the Vietnam War. And William Gaines, he's recognized as less of a footnote and more of a visionary, a legend even, the man who changed how comics reflect society. I think the rise of Marvel might have looked very different. While Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and others revolutionized superheroes in the 1960s, with more creative freedom, they could have created much edgier stories. For example, Spider-Man's famous anti-drug story arc from 1971, which did break the code. That could have been more of a typical Marvel story rather than an anomaly. I mean, with the full creative freedom to express themselves, who knows what the visionaries at Marvel could have given us in a censorship-free world. And without the code-killing horror comics back in 1954, the horror renaissance of the 1970s would never happen. It wouldn't need to. Instead, mainstream horror would have emerged organically a decade earlier. Imagine a world where complex Gothic horror emerges in the early days of Marvel. as a mainstream comic genre, not a niche market or a response to suppressed demand. Characters like Blade, Werewolf by Night, and Man-Thing might have had significantly different origins and histories. As the code continued to stifle creative freedom into the 1960s, the underground comics movement was born. Underground comics directly challenged the comics code by embracing taboo subjects like sex, drugs, political commentary. They embraced artistic experimentation and served as a powerful voice to the counterculture movement. Key figures like Robert Crumb and Art Spiegelman pushed the boundaries of comic art, not only influencing future generations, but ultimately helping redefine the medium. So would there have been a need for underground comics in a world where the Comics Code Authority doesn't exist? Probably not. But I'd like to think in this alternate world, the Robert Crumbs and the Art Spiegelmans of the world would have found success in mainstream comics, not hiding in the shadows, where they could have full creative control over their uncensored work. Another byproduct of the Comics Code Authority is the direct market. The code's strict policies drove away most adult comic book readers. And newsstands who would only carry books with the seal wouldn't sell mature content. This forced publishers to seek alternative distribution channels. Enter the direct market. By shipping comics directly to specialty stores, publishers were able to exploit a loophole and bypass the Comics Code Authority altogether. These stores were willing to carry edgier, more adult-themed comics, catering to a whole new audience. Hence, the comic book shop is born. But in a code-free world, there's really no need to push comics into specialty shops in the first place. In fact, there's no need to even leave the newsstands. Therefore, no collector's market, no comic book shops as we know them. Instead, comics remain a mainstream medium, selling on newsstands alongside newspapers and magazines. And they'd probably still be there today, maybe even reaching a broader audience like manga does in Japan. The code's influence eventually waned, and by 2011 it was officially dead. But its impact lingered in distribution systems, industry practices, and creative approaches. Ironically, digital comics have finally brought us full circle. Through platforms like Comixology and Webtoon, creators can now reach their readers directly, without having to go through traditional gatekeepers. The creative freedom of the pre-code era has returned, enhanced by technology's global reach. The Comics Code Authority remains a cautionary tale about the cost of censorship and the resilience of creative expression. While we can't know exactly how comics would have evolved without it, we can appreciate the renewed creative freedom of today's digital age. I'm curious to know, what do you think comics would look like today if the Comics Code Authority had never existed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, and subscribe for more. And if you haven't already done so, now would be a great time to Hulk smash the notification bell. It's still the best way to stay in the loop whenever I drop new content. And one last reminder, you can find me on Instagram if you're into that sort of thing. Give me a follow or just hit me up and say hello. You can find me there at Old Man Young. That's Old Man Young, all one word with a 0, not an O. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe and read some comics. See ya.